A car abandoned, a window marked with lipstick. The kind of scene that begs you to look closer, but the more you look, the less it makes sense. In the disappearance of Zebb Quinn, everything feels deliberate, and none of it points to the truth. Quiet and determined, Zebb Quinn was building his life piece by piece. He spent his days working under the fluorescent lights of Walmart, shelving inventory, and keeping his head down. In his mind, he was already thinking about the drills with his ROTC unit, and a future in tech or service. Something solid, earned, stable. Zebb wasn't flashy, but there was comfort in his rhythm. He had a car, a career path, a quiet kind of independence, and a plan he was working toward, one shift at a time. Outside a gas station after work, soda in hand, Zebb leaned against his car and felt a kind of lift, like things were finally starting to open up. He'd already made plans with his coworker, Robert Owens, to check out a Mitsubishi Eclipse that night, a car Owens said a friend was selling. Zebb had been looking for something new, something a little faster, a little cooler, a small bit of change on the horizon. It felt like the first real step into the life he imagined. Momentum, a reward. Not just a new way to drive, but a way to move forward. Proof that everything he'd been working toward finally felt within reach. A better future, and a deeper sense of himself. They pulled out of the lot, headlights stretching across the pavement, cutting a path through the dark. Halfway there, his pager buzzed against his side. Sharp, unexpected. A quick glance, and everything shifted. The quiet confidence from before dissolved. In its place came a tension he couldn't ignore. Fingers curled tighter around the wheel. He stared straight ahead, but his thoughts were elsewhere. Whatever it was, it couldn't wait. He flashed his headlights, signaling Owens to pull over. Said he needed to find a payphone to return a call. Hanging up the phone, Zebb's concern only grew. Frantic, he said something was wrong. No details, just that he had to go. He jumped back into his car, hit the gas too hard, clipping the back of Owens' truck, but he didn't stop. He backed up, turned the wheel, and sped off into the night. At first, Denise thought it was just a mix-up. Teenagers stay out late, plans change, maybe he forgot to call. She knew Zebb had a routine, one he took seriously, and she supported that by keeping him accountable. So she waited, despite the unease rising inside her. As the morning stretched on, and the silence held, that quiet instinct, the kind only a mother knows, grew heavier and harder to ignore. Zebb wouldn't do this, not without a word, not intentionally, and not for this long. This silence, it wasn't him. By late afternoon, she couldn't wait any longer, so she went to the police and reported Zebb missing. She tried to stay positive. Maybe he'd show up late, dragging himself in from wherever he'd spent the night. At the very least, he'd make it to work. So she called the store, trying to track him down, but it only raised more questions. Zebb had already called out sick, or at least someone had. The coworker couldn't put a finger on it, just said something felt off. The voice didn't sound like Zebb. The number was traced back to a Volvo plant, the same place where Robert Owens worked. When police questioned him, Owens didn't hesitate. He admitted to making the call, said Zebb had asked him to, on his behalf. But Denise knew better. It didn't make sense. Why would her son ask someone else to call in for him, instead of doing it himself? Why contact Owens, but never tell her where he was? Why not say something, anything, before vanishing? 4 days later, Zebb's car was found, abandoned in the parking lot of a barbecue restaurant, adjacent to the hospital Denise worked in. To others, it looked like a mystery. To her, it looked like theater. Inside the car, a jacket he didn't own, 2 half-finished sodas, a hotel key card. Across the back windshield, someone had drawn in lipstick, lips and an exclamation point. A symbol no one recognized. Meant to be noticed, not understood. And in the back seat, a puppy, alive, still, waiting for someone who never came back. It wasn't just strange, it was intentional. Every item pointed in a different direction. Runaway, romance, a stranger, a staged goodbye. The more they tried to make sense of it, the more it felt like a performance, and the less it seemed like Zebb. They were signs not meant to be understood, only seen. Whoever did this wasn't leaving clues. They were leaving noise. The investigation quickly became a maze, each clue pointing a different direction, what mattered and what was nothing at all. Eyewitnesses said a young woman parked Zebb's car in that lot. Composite sketches suggested she looked like Misty Taylor, a girl Zebb had been speaking with over the past few weeks, and to whom he'd grown attached. She had a boyfriend, and he had reportedly threatened Zebb after finding out they were talking. Then, something else surfaced, a late-night visit to the hospital, timed a little too perfectly. Hours after Zebb vanished, Owens turned up with fractured ribs and a head injury. He said it was from a car accident, but there was no report, no scene, just the damage and his word. And still, the questions kept coming. The page, the one that made Zebb leave, was traced to the home of his aunt, a woman he barely spoke with. When questioned, she said she hadn't been home that night, that she'd been out to dinner with her friend, Misty's mother. At the same table, Misty herself and her boyfriend. When Zebb's aunt came home, things were off. Objects were moved, small signs of intrusion. She filed a report for a suspected break-in, but didn't bring any answers. Everything seemed connected, though no one could see how. A woman in Zebb's car, a dinner that suddenly meant more, an injury with no accident, and a page that sent him running. Each one pointed somewhere new, but none of them led to the truth. It was like chasing a pattern drawn in sand, always fading before it could be followed. Whatever happened to Zebb wasn't random, it was arranged. But even with that certainty, the case didn't move. With no more trails to follow, it slipped into silence, and stayed there, waiting. Over a decade later, the case resurfaced. Not through discovery, but through loss. Owens was back in the picture, and 2 more lives had vanished. In March 2015, Christy and JT Codd stopped answering their phones. Christy was a chef, once a contestant on Food Network's Star, warm, loud, generous in the kitchen. JT worked in film, steady hands behind the camera. They were expecting a daughter, a future they could almost see, just months away. Their house sat tucked into the mountains, surrounded by trees and sky, a quiet oasis safely out of reach from everyone else's problems. When they suddenly stopped communicating, concern turned to alarm. Christy's father reached out to the police to perform a welfare check on his daughter. When deputies arrived at the Codd's home, the couple was gone, and the house was eerily quiet. Their cars and dogs were still there, but no one answered the door. In the days following their disappearance, investigators discovered someone had broken into the home and taken belongings. Suspicion turned to a man the Codds knew, their neighbor, who had recently done work on their property, Robert Owens. He'd been seen throwing their belongings into a dumpster and selling others at local pawn shops. With evidence mounting and more of the Codds' belongings found inside his home, Owens was brought in for questioning. He told investigators it was an accident. His truck got stuck. JT and Christy tried to help. He hit the gas too hard, and somehow, it ended in tragedy. But his voice didn't break. He didn't flinch. He told the same story, again and again, calm, repetitive, rehearsed. He said he panicked, didn't know what to do, so he took items from their home to make it look like a robbery. He brought their bodies back to his trailer, dismembered them, and piece by piece, burned them in his wood stove. It was a confession delivered without emotion, too structured to feel spontaneous. And despite his story, despite every attempt to frame himself as a witness to an accident, Owens pleaded guilty to the murders of Christy and J.T. Codd. After his conviction, whatever image he had maintained of innocence fell away. The mask was gone, and in that absence of doubt, something else came back into view. Zebb's fate. The spotlight didn't return because of new evidence, but because the man who once stood at the edge of the story was now standing in blood. 15 years earlier, Owens was a suspect without a motive. Now, he looked like something far worse. In prison, when the questions finally turned back to Zebb, Owens didn't hesitate. Not with remorse, but with a story he seemed prepared to tell. He said his uncle was the killer, hired by Misty's boyfriend. The page that night, Owens claimed, had been part of the plan. A lure meant to draw Zebb out. Zebb ran into the darkness and was shot with a .22 caliber rifle. He never saw it coming. Owens insisted he only helped afterward, that he was forced to clean up what remained. Zebb was dismembered, burned, and scattered through the woods. Ash before his life ever truly began. For a moment, it sounded like a confession, one that might finally hold the truth, but none of it could be verified. There was no evidence his uncle knew anyone involved. His uncle had already passed, unable to confirm, deny, or even speak for himself. The site where Owens claimed the remains would be found turned up empty. There was nothing that tied his story to reality. And soon, Owens began contradicting himself, rewriting pieces of his own account, until none of it could stand. In the end, he took it all back. But even without a confession, prosecutors believed they had enough. They offered a deal, and Owens accepted, pleading guilty to accessory after the fact, to Zebb Quinn's murder, but never to harming him. A small piece of truth in a story that offered almost none. But truth wasn't the same as clarity. Convictions create headlines, sometimes they even create closure, but in this case, they didn't bring answers. And even with someone behind bars, there's no closure, only the sense that Zebb was caught in a game he never agreed to play. A pawn, used, then discarded. His family is left with the uncertainty, and the ache of knowing they may never get the full story, just confusion and someone's desire to manipulate and control. This wasn't a puzzle to solve, it was a performance to endure. A theater of false leads, scattered symbols, and hidden motives. A stage where the audience was blind, and the script kept changing, and Zebb didn't even know he was in the play. Thank you for spending time with me, and with Zebb, Christy, and JT. If this story resonated with you, I hope you'll like, subscribe, turn on notifications, and come back for more. Until then, be still.